We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. I like to think we're simplifying manhood and masculinity, but my co-host Boyson constantly reminds me that in some ways we complicate it, but that's who we are, complicated beings, us men and boys. And my guest today, Dr. Michael Eiden, one of the youngest certified co-leaders in the Mankind Project, and is someone who has already made an incredible impact through his clinical work and leadership, joins us today. Michael is a licensed clinical social worker, a board-certified sex therapist, and a certified sex addiction therapist with over a decade of experience helping individuals and families navigate addiction, trauma, and unhealthy relationship patterns. He specializes in process addictions like screen and sex addiction, complex trauma, and relational healing using a highly experiential, task-centered approach. And just recently, Michael successfully defended his doctoral dissertation in front of his community, school faculty, and colleagues, which is no small feat, on a topic very close to our conversation today, which is helping parents address screen use, compulsivity in their children. Mike, welcome to the Mankind Podcast.
Thanks a lot for having me, Brandon. Really glad to be here, man.
Yeah. Of all the intros I've done, that one had a lot of meat on the bone. I don't think I've used trauma and addiction that much in the first 2 minutes of a podcast. So there we go. We're getting in deep. So mate, just tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to get to know you a little bit better. Being in and around the Mankind Project, I've heard your name for years as a young man in the work. Just very inspired by another young man in the work, which is really cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll get underway.
Sure. My name is Michael Eiden. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and just recently moved to Portland, Oregon. I got involved in the Mankind Project in 2012. I was 18 when I did the weekend and got pretty heavily involved soon after. I was fortunate that my father was involved in the work for a long time before I did the weekend. So I kind of grew up with a lot of these weird uncles and guys he was doing groups with, which, had a massive influence on me. You know, the story for so many men is that they, especially in that transition from boyhood to manhood, lack a robust set of men around them to kind of teach them, hold them. That wasn't my experience. I had plenty of people around. And sort of how I got involved in clinical work and social work in my career was mostly through my own personal path and sobriety. I got sober at 20 and had a lot of close friends that were social workers who were also in long-term sobriety, and that was kind of my entry into the field. And then fast forward to now, my training in process addictions is kind of what led me into looking at this issue with screen and technology addiction, which is usually kind of a collection of gaming, pornography use, social media, online gambling, that kind of thing. And originally I got into it because I think with a lot of parents and families, I sort of look the part in the sense that children or young people work with me and they don't see their parents. They can see someone who is somewhat in the way of a peer or feels like a peer because I also grew up on the internet. So anyways, really glad to be here and excited to talk about some of what I've learned in working with families and parents and adults who are screen addicted.
You know, I love to hear that you too were introduced to this through your father, because that's my story. At the age of 9, my dad got involved in this work, and the uncles, right? They all had cool animal names. So I was really into that as a kid and took me to the graduations. And by the time I turned 18, I wasn't as open, I guess, as yourself to the work, because Dad's like, "You're 18, it's time to do the weekend." And I'm like, "Dad, I know all I need to know about the world. I'm 18. I'm an adult now. MKP is just for broken men." right? That was the narrative in the story. And that obviously is very untrue. But, 23 was my time to enter into the work. So really cool. Love to hear that too. Well, let's get started and let's get sunk in. So you and I understand what it's like to grow up with internet and with devices and Game Boys and Nintendos and all that jazz. But from my previous conversations with two guests, specifically Dr. Justin Romano and Dino Ambrosi, who have both come on the show to talk about this topic in different angles around screen addiction, around how these apps and these devices are designed to keep us on the hook. And one of the things that came up as a common theme in those conversations was that a lot of kids are hearing, you need to be careful with screens or get off screens from people that didn't grow up with them per se. So there is that disconnect. Set the scene for not just people like myself and in and around our age, but perhaps our older listeners who didn't grow up with the internet or those devices. How'd we get here?
How we got here and kind of the factors involved are many. I'll share some of what I think have been the most impactful. 2007 was when the smartphone came on the market, and that was kind of the biggest landmark change when it came to how most people relate to technology. The next big advent after that was when the iPhone adopted the front-facing camera and included notifications, which turned technology like a smartphone from a tool into something that summoned us even without our intention to pick it up. The biggest difference I find between people who grew up without the internet and those that didn't is that if you didn't get a cell phone until you were after you completed high school, that means you probably had the chance to form friendships, maybe experiment with romance and dating, probably had some ways to regulate your mood and tolerate distress that didn't involve technology, and you found ways to have a hobby or an interest that didn't involve the internet. If you were younger than 18 when you first got a smartphone, that means all of those developmental milestones happen through the medium of technology. And so the two experiences of developmental exposure are patently different, to your point, for people who might be in the baby boomer generation to millennials or Gen Z. The other really significant factor that I always try to mention in these conversations is kind of a reference to the attention economy, which is at this point, the biggest commodity that exists in the world is the human attention. Bigger than oil or natural gas or any kind of mined material. So the piece is there are massive capitalist imperatives that make greater and greater amounts of the human attention being spent on the internet necessary for those gains to continue. And so a lot of the outcomes that we experience in the way of addiction or feeling left out if we're not paying enough attention to social media or the news, or feeling really busy and important and necessary, that we keep this kind of ubiquitous relationship with the internet always alive in our lives. Those are intended outcomes that make all of us better consumers. So part of my goal with all this is to help people untangle themselves and their children ultimately from a system that would have them be wholly enmeshed with the internet at all times, so that they can have some autonomy, so they can get bored and ultimately become creative, and also that they can protect their own privacy online.
Yeah, that's a big one too. So we're going to talk about some strategies eventually. So for those listening, we're going to get to some strategies for youth and teen addiction, as well as adult addiction, and systems we can put in place. You brought up that really, for me, what stood out a lot there was the understanding that if you were under the age of 18 with a screen, or if you're over the age of 18 when you got your first smartphone, was that you had to build relationships, or maybe not, but you were forced to in many ways. If you wanted social interaction, you couldn't scratch that itch with a device or online. It had to be going to a party. It had to be going to hang out with friends. It had to be building a ramp in the backyard. And it was there you were building necessary social skills, getting into fights, getting into arguments, resolving issues, falling in love, testing and measuring there in all the different ways that you can as a youth and as a young person, Whereas now, like, oh, rather than go out and try and form relationships or find a romantic partner, I can just open my phone and pull up someone who looks like the archetype of the woman or the man I'm attracted to and just watch them have sex on my phone and scratch that itch. Tick. Now I'm not thinking about it all of a sudden. So it makes sense how we got here. And so what is your deeper motivation behind getting into this specific area of research and work?
I'll be honest, it was really born out of necessity, in that much of my clinical work is focused on trauma, and helping people unpack and untangle and heal from childhood trauma. That's sort of the core of who I am as a practitioner. But around 2020, like most people, my life changed dramatically as a result of the pandemic, and my practice changed dramatically as well. Where my passion now lies is in the idea that there is this massive amount of creative genius that lives in the children and the young people all over the world. And my concern and experience is their ability to develop and utilize that creative genius is hijacked by the internet and, again, kind of market initiatives. So I don't want to place in any way all the blame on parents. Parents do play a role in protecting their children, but they're up against it. The school system typically has become progressively more and more tech dependent at earlier stages in education. It's not uncommon for elementary school kids to have to take a Chromebook or a tablet home from school to do their homework.
Right.
And to your point, the sort of collective normalization of needing to be plugged into certain forms of social media to kind of be in connection with other people. So parents are up against it. But my goal ultimately is to do my part to prevent this huge groundswell of addiction that I think is coming down the pike in the younger generations, and ultimately that we can use their creative genius to solve our world's problems, or at least co-create that.
Yeah, there you go. Helping them tap into more than what they're getting access to because of just being distracted and being sucked into the stimuli. When we had Dr. Romano on the show, he described that with a lot of the youth that he's working with, there were a lot of, not uncommon to get quite extreme cases of screen addiction where when these devices were confiscated, that suicidal threats were beginning to surface. A 16-year-old girl gets her phone taken away and it's all of a sudden, I'm going to kill myself, and just complete like massive outbursts. He said that what he witnesses is a lot of it mirrors drug withdrawals. That when you take a kid's phone away who's been using it regularly, all of a sudden it looks like they're coming off heroin and meth. So before it gets that severe, what have you recognized are many of the early warning signs that you look for, and ways that it starts to become harmful in either kids or adults? What are those signs that we need to be looking out for? Because if it is normalized for kids to be tapped into social media and their phones and their tablets and their computers, if it's normalized, then we may not be able to see it, right? So what are those warning signs?
Great question. So some of this will apply. I'll do my best to kind of answer in terms of what you might notice in a child and how I might notice it in an adult as well, because there is a ton of overlap in how we respond. Some things that you'll want to pay attention to as early warning signs would be a lack of what we call distress tolerance, which means there is a very limited window or range that I have to be able to handle discomfort or emotional pain in my body without becoming reactive or having to act out or numb in some way, which is part of what you're speaking to with what looks like kind of an age-inappropriate tantrum or random or seemingly random kind of act of violence or threat of violence towards self or others in response to a limit being set. That's a lack of distress tolerance. My body can't handle the amount of distress that's occurring inside, so I become overwhelmed and I act out. It's kind of a core indicator. Some other things would be having a difficult experience of like my executive functioning decreasing, which is going to look like I'm having a hard time focusing. I'm having a hard time organizing myself in space, getting things done on time, remembering things. And that's a decrease from my previous level of functioning. Other things would be like having a loss of interest in things that are non-screen related that I used to be interested in. So for children, it might be they used to be interested in soccer or art or theater, and now all of a sudden things that are non-tech related, they don't express interest in or don't spend their time doing those things any longer. Some other things would be having a hard time being still and being in my body without distraction, which can look like always needing at least one earbud in that's playing some kind of auditory stimulus that keeps me from having to be in my body altogether. Something I hear from parents a lot is like, I can't get my kids to come to the table without their earbud in, or they're all, even if they're in the house and we're all kind of connecting in some way, they're still plugged in, even if they're not actually looking at their devices. Which is a simple way of saying it's really difficult for me to manage the nuance or the discomfort of relationship without there being some kind of external stimulus present in the way of technology.
Yeah, that's a really neat one. Something I've been testing recently. I just through some books I've been reading, I've gathered this task of when I hike and mountain bike, because we're surrounded by trails here, that I'm not doing it with headphones in. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because I think, oh, I could really make moves with my audiobook right now or listen to that podcast episode. But now I'm reserving that from when I'm doing like landscaping or some stuff around the house. But when I'm hiking or biking, it has to be boredom. I call it boredom. It starts off as boredom and then it just becomes inspiration because I'm listening to the birds and the trees and the wind and my own breath. And it allows me that time to really work through a lot of stuff that I got going on in my life. So it's interesting to have that forced mechanism to be bored and seeing that as something that would be helpful or necessary. Driving too. I'm not allowing myself to listen to anything while driving, which again was counterintuitive to where my brain was working, but I'm seeing the benefit in so many ways. I'm thinking of things that I wouldn't otherwise be thinking about and coming to conclusions and solutions on things. So huge proponent of that last one for sure.
Yeah, what you're referencing, Brandon, and getting the benefits of is what researchers call the default mode network, which is this interconnected series of brain regions that is more active when our brain is at rest. And it does all the things you just described so eloquently. It pulls together disparate ideas. We engage creative problem solving, inspiration. All that happens when we're bored, which I really like the work of. There's a woman named Celeste Headley, and she talks about boredom being a really fertile neurological state. And oftentimes, boredom is a particular state that kids and people who are tech addicted compulsively avoid.
Yeah.
So one factor to look at in terms of an early warning sign of addiction with technology is that you never experience boredom.
Okay. Never experienced boredom. That's so interesting. So interesting. So I have a 2.5-year-old, and we have noticed those moments. We've always been strict on screens. We'll go days without it. Even when she does have it, we try and keep it to 30 minutes. Make sure it's low stimuli. So we're not getting the Coco Melon change every 3 second kind of thing. It's more like the Wiggles or Miss Rachel was great. Bluey, if we want to be entertained too.
Right.
But when she has, say, whatever season, whatever day we're having, when she has had access to it more than 30 minutes or an hour, she will blow her lid when we take it away. And that it's so insightful. It's like, what happened to my kid? And so to me, I see it as that distress tolerance, just firing off. Whereas if we intentionally don't give her any screens or anything else to stimulate her, I will find her in her room with a book on her lap, singing and just flipping the pages. And it's inspiring to me. Someone who likes to be stimulated a lot. My challenge is the Echo, Amazon Echo in the kitchen. I've always got TED Talks going while I'm cooking, or doing something like that. And so, yeah, it's almost habitual. I walk into the room, I go, Alexa, open YouTube. Whereas my kid's just in there reading a book on her lap and teaching me a thing or two.
Yeah, it's also a great example, Brandon. I think that sometimes a common concern I hear from parents when we start to talk about something like reducing screen time or eliminating it altogether for a period is, what are they going to do? What am I going to do with them?
Mm,
And this idea that kids won't have the ability to engage other activities if screens are taken away, which your experience is showing you is simply not true.
yeah. What's up, guys? Brandon here. Now, I used to think that hustle meant grinding myself into the ground, but then I learned there's a way to stay sharp and steady without burning out. And that is why I added Magic Mind to my mornings. Now, Magic Mind is a mental performance shot loaded with lion's mane for clarity, ashwagandha to keep stress at bay, turmeric to fight inflammation, and many, many more incredible ingredients that have all been put through rigorous tests over the past 10 years. It's all been tested, inspected for purity before every bottle reaches your hands. Now you can get yours at magicmind.com/mankind50 with the code mankind50 for up to 48% off your first order. When you support our sponsors, you support our show, and trust me, you will not regret it when you get your hands on this stuff. So what about, I want to get into solutions here. Let's do it for now. Ways that we can address this early. So if we're identifying that our kid is losing their distress tolerance, their executive functions being impacted, they're not interested in things outside of just getting distracted by screens, and they have that inability to kind of just be still and in the moment. What are effective ways that we can address that, or maybe even just begin the conversation? Because I imagine throwing their Xbox out the window is not the even though it's sometimes satisfactory to watch on on YouTube, these kids blow their lid. I imagine that's probably doing more harm than good. So what's some good beginning steps here on how to address it?
Great question. So what I recommend to parents is that you treat this approach of this problem as a family experiment. And like most times we're addressing any kind of addictive behavior, if you're the person bringing the concern to the the quote addicted person, it's best to start from a place of ownership of your part that helps them to receive the information a little better. So the message for parents is, if your child becomes screen addicted, you have played a part in the development of that problem.
Bingo.
And oftentimes it's the abdication of parental responsibility in some way. So I find it lands really well just to acknowledge that, like, hey, I've played a role in allowing this to come to be. And now I would like to play a role in experimenting with you on changing our relationship with technology. So for a family system, we might identify, wow, one person has been gaming for hours and hours a day. It's having a massive impact on their life, poor academic performance, they're emotionally dysregulated, on and on. They might engage a period of total abstinence from technology. Everyone else in the family needs to be working on something as well, which might mean at home, we all take away non-essential technology use, meaning we're not going to be using tablets, TVs, and phones to entertain ourselves. Parents, of course, if you're engaged in the modern world, probably have to do some level of emailing, phone calling, using your calendar, that kind of thing. But non-essential technology use, take it off the table for a period of time, everyone involved. It de-shames the experience for the, quote, addicted person, and kind of sends the message that we're all in this together. My experience in families has also been that when we do that, we do what comes natural, which is to connect with each other. And oftentimes that missing connection may have been a causal factor in the addiction to begin with. So depending on the age of your child, oftentimes if you look kind of at a set of those 10 classic addiction criteria, and you're seeing a buildup of tolerance, you're seeing withdrawal or acting out when the screens are taken away, you see them use it and it creates consequences and they continue despite the consequences, you're going to want to engage something in the way of an abstinence period from technology. For a 2 or 3 year old, that abstinence period could be pretty brief. It might be 3 or 4 days or a week. For a 10 to 12 year old, it might be more like 2 weeks or 30 days. For an older teenager that maybe has had a lot of access to technology for a long time and their addiction has had more time to develop, the abstinence period you engage might be more like 2 to 3 months.
Got you. And yeah, and so mum and dad, or dad and mum, you've got to do that too. You've got to get in it with them. Yeah, so it isn't that shaming. And kids can know, they can recognize hypocrisy immediately, right? And so I recognize Bindy's behavior. And if I've been gaming for, 2-3 hours on a weekend, calling it downtime, and yeah, it's nice. It's a good recharge. But man, I can be a turd the rest of the day. Like I can really recognize it. Like I can be a bit of an asshole when I've just been playing that, like, Call of Duty or whatever, just to shut off. And so, yeah, I can see that too. So that's in many ways an approach if the genie has already been let out of the bottle in many ways. What about younger parents earlier in the journey? What are some of the non-negotiables? I know that something from listening to Dr. Daniel Amen's work that we intend to apply is no smartphones until the age of 16. They can have a dumb phone, they can make calls, but not a smartphone till the age of 16. Another one is no social media at all until that same point as well. That's what we're currently rolling with. What are your non-negotiables for those of us that are starting the journey early so that we can ensure that we're not letting that genie out of the bottle?
Yeah, I agree with those two previous recommendations for sure. Some other non-negotiables that is true for children throughout their lifespan is to not involve technology use in the first hour of waking and the last hour prior to sleep. To extend that into sleep, it's imperative that kids not take their technology into their bedrooms at night and that they not have TVs in their bedrooms.
Yes, phone. Yeah, they cannot have access to their computer or their phone or anything in their room. Yes, I've heard that one.
Which I recommend for adults as well. I highly suggest that you not use your phone as your alarm clock. Invest in an old school alarm clock. Keep your phone outside of your bedroom as well. So that you can, it's really hard to not spend the first 60 minutes of your waking time on your phone if the first thing you grab to wake up is your alarm clock.
Yeah, very true.
So that's a good non-negotiable. Some other things to consider as a baseline that shouldn't change is that the concept of earned screen time is a failing concept, meaning like maybe kids get 30 minutes a day, but if you engage XYZ good behavior, do your chores, get an A in school, you get an extra hour on the weekend to game. Failed concept.
Okay.
The concept of earned screen time activates the addictive process because it puts this big juicy carrot of an abnormal dopamine response at the end of a quote good behavior.
So it's like, if you do your chores, we'll give you some meth. Yeah, gotcha.
Precisely. So that's a good one I mention to parents often. Something else as a kind of an imperative is that kids have screen-free time for play with peers that is hopefully unencumbered by the oversight and rulemaking of an adult. For all the reasons that you mentioned in the beginning, Brandon, that when kids are in that stage of our development where we play a lot with people that are our peers, we learn social skills, we learn how to navigate conflict. All of that happens better and naturally without the constant oversight or monitoring of adults. I really like the work of a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book. You might be familiar with his work, and the idea of a play-based childhood is an important thing to preserve.
Yeah, the street lights.
Exactly.
You were to be home when the street lights went off or when you could hear the tin whistle from a mile away. That was the time to come home. Yeah, I hear that. How would you approach these issues if you recognize that someone close to you is in the throes of what, I don't have a DSM-5 in front of me. Well, and not to mention screen addiction and social media addiction isn't even in the DSM-5, which is, to me, outrageous. And so for those listening, you can give a better explanation. What is the DSM-5?
The DSM-5 stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's basically a text that healthcare professionals use to diagnose and treat mental health disorders. So to Brandon's point, that is the kind of the governing document that allows us to categorize different symptoms into disorders. Ultimately, so insurance companies will pay and distribute money to treatment centers or practitioners to facilitate the treatment. Right now, there are two diagnoses that are likely to be included in the next version of the DSM. One is internet gaming disorder, and the other is something called compulsive sexual behavior disorder. which is something that would encapsulate things like a pornography addiction.
Okay.
Internet gaming disorder is what it sounds like. It's specific to online gaming, so it'll be helpful if you engage either of those two behaviors to the extent that it could be diagnosed. What's not so helpful is that I think they're a little too specific to one behavior.
One behavior. Yeah.
I've yet to meet a person who's screen addicted that's addicted to one kind of technology use. It's typically kind of a collection or a smattering of gaming, social media, gambling, pornography together in some way.
See, I'm immediately frustrated because my understanding is the DSM-5 doesn't get updated all that often. Like there's long periods of years before it gets updated, and we have a very pressing issue on our hands. When Dino was on the show, he spoke about the amount of people that die on the road because of use of their phones, and it's far more than many of the diagnosable things that are in the DSM-5. I don't want to put my tinfoil hat on here, Michael, but I think I may just for a second. Knowing that certain powers that be have control over how decisions are made in the government, how decisions are made on the business side of things, do you feel like there are certain things at play that are making it harder for more broader diagnoses to be included in the DSM-5?
I would say, of course, there is. Some evidence I have for that would be things like I talked about the school system and how there is this massive push to have technology embedded earlier and earlier in education. What's interesting to me is that the pushback on ideas like a ban on phone use in schools is we don't have enough data to suggest that those kinds of initiatives are successful or effective. We also don't have any data that shows that the inclusion of technology early in education is effective, right? Which I think is an interesting omission in the literature. But to your point, to keep it simple, there is a massive, massive amount of money to be made off larger and larger chunks of our population becoming addicted to the internet. And billions of dollars will be moved around if that changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Golly, I'm getting mad now.
Because your anger is warranted. Yeah.
Well, and as a parent, right? So there's a public magnet school up the road from us, and it's an outdoor education school, and they have banned cell phones, banned smartphones specifically. And that's a big draw as to why we're looking to them for our daughter. And one thing I've heard from Height and Eamon as well that they've said is if you're a parent and your kid's school allows phones, like you need to be getting into those PTA meetings and making demands. Like start making demands, because the argument around like safety and access to be able to get a hold of parents and stuff, I've heard that argument's not as valid or as strong, because that's the default, right? Well, my kid needs to be able to call me if something goes on or whatever. But really what those kids are doing is they're not on the playground playing with each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're just on their phones, and they've got access to more information than their brain could ever fully wrap their head around and comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, it's low-hanging fruit to kind of use that they need to be able to call you. My counterpoint would be they can call you on a phone that doesn't have the internet.
Yeah, there you go.
It's
Give
not
them a dumb phone.
Exactly.
So, okay, so that was a fun and necessary tangent there to talk about the DSM-5 and kind of some of the structures in place of why we're not able to address many of these issues. So what are some of the, if clinicians are not able to diagnose screen addiction, what are they left with? Like what is the route in order to be able to get these kids and adults proper help if they aren't able to just label it what it is?
Oftentimes what clinicians are in a position to do is to take what is likely to be one of the comorbid conditions the person has and use that as the diagnosis. So, for example, it's really common for people who are tech addicted to experience a tremendous amount of social anxiety. And so it's likely they could meet criteria for something like generalized anxiety disorder. And so you could use that as a diagnosis to sort of substantiate the treatment that you want to pursue. The other pieces that I just want to mention this is that, like me, I work with technology and sex addiction, both of which are diagnoses that are not in the DSM. So oftentimes, these areas of treatment are kind of relegated to private practice or to treatment centers that don't take insurance because they're not able to bill for it, which means that it's those on the more affluent end of the social spectrum that are able to get help in the first place. So oftentimes it might be left more to books and materials that can be found online for parents and families attempting to address this for those who might have to truly rely on their health insurance to get mental health care in the first place.
Right.
So it exacerbates an inequity in our mental health treatment system because we don't have these diagnoses to kind of further accentuate that point. But
could that also be a contributing factor to, we're seeing a lot of kids and a lot of young adults, even older adults, getting diagnosed with social anxiety or getting diagnosed with depression, and we're seeing those stats. Gen Z is the most depressed and anxious generation. Jonathan Haidt makes that argument in his book. But like you said, comorbid. Do you think that could be contributing to a lot of those stats that we're seeing, that it's like, hello, people, wake up? We can put them on a drug, and we can, give them a way that their body can regulate its system through an external means. But really, we can really drive a lot of this towards screens and social media and attention economy.
I'm glad you bring that part up, man, because the other one that I have seen and experienced the most in my practice is the overlap with ADHD, where it's super common that people will come into my office and their child has gotten diagnosed with ADHD. And what I've learned in kind of digging through how that diagnosis came to be was that the practitioner, either through their own omission or the child or the parents not making the report, had no ability to kind of keep the child's relationship with technology in mind as a potential causal factor for the executive functioning deficit they were experiencing with ADHD. And the downside is that active screen addiction mimics almost exactly what ADHD looks like in a young person or an adult. So an important takeaway for anyone listening is that if you're concerned that yourself or anyone in your life, especially a young person, might have ADHD, it's imperative that the person who is assessing them to determine whether or not they have ADHD has a full history of their screen and technology use so they can potentially rule that out. What I share with people is that even the best diagnostician can't differentiate and tell you exactly what's a causal factor if that's not ruled out. And sometimes what that might just look like is to engage a period of abstinence from technology for 2 weeks or 30 days and see what symptoms sustain. And then you'll have a lot greater clarity about whether ADHD is on board or not.
See, that's as parents, we get very hooked in on certain things. Like, we watch what goes into our daughter's body, make sure the red dye 40 is removed. Like, we're taking those measures and a lot of around her health and what she's consuming. But on the screen side as well, that's something that my wife came across. I believe it's some research coming out of Australia that is linking screen use in the first 3 years of life to ADHD. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, it makes a lot of sense because the brain, as it's developing, is not having to work very hard when given a screen. It's just plug in and just let the screen lead the way, the show or whatever. That's why, I mean, like Coco Melon, for example, I mean, they ended up in a lot of hot water because the scene is very colorful, it's very vibrant, and the scene that you're looking at, the screen, is never there for more than 3 or 4 seconds. It's the TikTok formula. Mm-hmm. These short little things where you're just getting these little doses. So it's constantly changing and the kid's brain is having to readapt. Whereas I grew up with, say, like Bananas in Pajamas. I don't know if anyone in the States ever watched Bananas in Pajamas or The Wiggles. It was one frame and it maybe changed every 15 to 30 seconds, but your mind had the ability to really hone in on that scene and that frame. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, we see this huge, especially with with millennials, our generation, ADHD took a massive surge And that makes a lot of sense too with our adoption of screens and video games and such. Anyway, I'm not in a position to say it is or isn't a thing, but that's what I'm running with. That's my belief.
Yeah, there's definitely an emergent area of research looking at that in particular. Does early screen exposure increase the likelihood that someone develops ADHD? Which it shouldn't. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, meaning you should be born with it. It should not develop over time. But that's what we're seeing is that oftentimes what I ask people is, did you experience those same symptoms 2 years before you started having a smartphone? And oftentimes the answer is no. But those are the kinds of questions that have to enter into those offices with your physician or your pediatrician or your therapist for this to change.
It's going to help you. It's going to help your licensed professional. Certainly. So ways that we can, you've mentioned a lot of, we've got non-negotiables here. We've got warning signs, ways that we can self-diagnose. And I can find myself getting hooked by this thing easily. What are ways that you recommend folks can self-identify their behavior? And for yourself, how does it show up in your own self? I imagine you could be tough at times because you probably feel the same pull. But you're doing this research, so it's almost like, I'm not allowed. I can't do it.
I have found, Brandon, that all the research I've done in my life has been me search first. Everything I've been interested in and wanted to read books about had something to do with me. So to be direct, I have met criteria for technology addiction multiple times in my life. And I've spent a couple years without social media at all. I've had periods where I didn't use a smartphone. So all the things that I suggest to people, I have personally experimented with and am accountable to. And I'm in it in the same way everyone else is. The thing I struggle with the most right now is my email. Gmail hired teams of psychologists to come up with that simple feature in Gmail where when you scroll down to see if you have a new email, that little dotted circle emerges. That dotted circle is meant to build anticipation and lets you know that something new is coming, which is the same mechanism that Coco Melon uses with the quick changes in the frame. It's novelty seeking rhythmically. So I'm victim to that as well. And even with all this stuff I think I know, I continue to struggle with it. So what I would suggest to people who want to self-evaluate, there's a couple things I would recommend. One is to Google Internet Addiction Test by Kimberly Young. Kimberly Young is the woman who is credited with being the first person to mention internet addiction in academic research. She has a 20-item questionnaire that helps to self-assess an internet addiction. What I like about hers is that the language is broad and captures all kinds of screen use. It's not just about one kind in particular. And look at your score and be honest with yourself about what that might mean in terms of change behavior. Some other things I found that works well is to experiment a little bit with changing up some of your habits, which could look like take a half day or a 24-hour period without technology and keep a notebook with you to record your experience. And specifically, like what you might find difficult about that. It's really common to experience things like boredom, fear of missing out, irritability, or even like kind of a listlessness or a depressive symptom, which are all examples of withdrawal from technology addiction. That's a great way to get into the felt embodied experience of how hooked I might be. Some other things to do, this is kind of a series of things I usually have folks start with if they're attempting to address a technology addiction and treatment is take a piece of paper and at the top, write down the 3 most important things to you in your life, 3 most important areas of your life. Could be values, could be things you want to do with your time. The next thing to do would be to make a time inventory of your last week, let's say. Like, what did you actually spend your time doing each day? What I find is a great tool for that is the screen time calculator on your phone. So you can specifically look at the places and the amounts of time your attention goes into your technology. And start with some prompts like, what value does this particular app or experience bring to my life? And what does it cost me? And what do I lose when I engage it? Just to get into some self-inquiry about your own relationship with technology. If you're in a relationship the next best thing to do would be to take that information to your partner and ask them, how does the time I spend here affect you? And chances are you'll learn, for me, I learned much more about the reality of my technology use and how it might impair my relationships with others. That because of the collective normalization or how awkward it can be to talk about, we don't want to bring up. So those would be some good places to start to self-assess.
Wow. Well, and I'm going to have those in the show notes as well. It's the internet addiction test and the screen time calculator you can find on your phone. Yeah, man. YouTube is mine. It often tells me 3 hours a week I'm spending on YouTube, and that's either catching up on mixed martial arts news or it's learning. And so I can make an argument to go, oh, but I'm learning new things all the time while I'm cooking or driving. But on the other side of that, if I'm really honest with myself, is what have I already learned that I'm not applying? And then I'm just gaining more stimuli and distracting myself with the next thing. So coming away with a lot here, mate, a lot. I mean, these warning signs, I've already seen them in my daughter. I'm thankful for how little we have put in front of her at this stage of her life, but also recognize that it's so easy to just give her an iPad and give us our time back. But the cost is far too high on that front. I love that. And a question I was baking in is, how do you address phone addiction in a partner? And you already gave us the answers to that. Is my thing here, is to take ownership from your own, and then join in whatever is an agreed upon plan in and around that too. Unless I'm missing a nuance there.
No, those are both right on. The only thing I would add is if I'm concerned my significant other has an addiction, you can use a skill called soft starting when it comes to approaching the conversation, which is to focus on the impact the behavior has on me and how I experience you, and not to get into diagnosis and language and labeling, which might sound like when we sit down together on the couch after we put the kids to bed and I see you pull out your phone and start to scroll Instagram, the story I tell myself is that I don't matter and I'm not important to you. And I miss you when that happens, which is all about me and my experience, has nothing to do with diagnosing you and saying you need help. So that would be the point of focus, is to specifically address the impact of the behavior.
I love that. Yeah, the soft start, ringing John and Julie Gottman, kind of ringing in the ears there. So
exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'll end on this. My end to this, because I want to ask you one more question, is when we do our new warrior trainings, when we staff those weekends, it's 4 days away from family. And not all groups enforce this, but the intention is that we're not going to be on our phones during that time. Harder for me when I got a little one at home. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying it's hard. It's hard for me. But come around Sunday, 4 days, no phone. I don't want to turn that thing on. It's amazing how Thursday, Friday, it's like the pull to look at it is there. Saturday, I've forgotten about it almost entirely. And then Sunday, it's like, I do not want to turn my phone on. And so I want to hear from you, Michael, the success stories of folks you've been working with in and around taking breaks from screens and technology, and what have been some of the results you've been seeing in some of your clients and others you know?
There's a couple that come to mind. One is an older couple that they've been married multiple decades, and to synthesize to condense the story, the male partner in the couple is blind, and his wife is his primary caregiver. And she got horribly addicted to social media and gaming on her phone. It had a massive impact on their relationship, almost led to divorce in their elder years together. After engaging, some really hard conversations about the genesis of the addiction and what she was covering up in her own amount of pain in the relationship, what I get to hear now are how they lay on the couch together late at night and she reads to him. And so it's those moments of connection when we really slow down and have time and can make time for when it's not sucked up by the use of the internet. That's pay dirt for me. That's as good as it gets. Another recently was a young man I started working with after he failed out of his first year of college, which is super, super common as an entry into therapy for a technology addiction. It's like I get outside the support of my parents helping me stay accountable to technology use, and I'm on my own, and it kind of spins out of control. Now to hear him talk about developing his own hobbies and interest and meeting up with other people in his neighborhood to sit and talk and share the development of their skills together. For a 20-year-old, that sounds like a pretty extreme movement, right? There's no phones involved. They go and meet in person. They sit down and they share stories about what they're learning about themselves. And he's able to do that without any sort of external system keeping him accountable to it. He does it now because he wants to. And it's that internal motivation that would pull him towards that's impossible for him to have access to when he's addicted. Mm-hmm. So those would be those are the kind of the cream on the top that I get to witness with people who have the courage to take this on.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, and knowing that the technology genie is in fact out of the bottle, and, in reality, unless we went through a full blown, the grid shuts down and we no longer have access to electricity. What is the impact that you're really hoping that this research and this work is going to have on a broader scale? I mean, those individual experiences are very motivating and very special and very beautiful. But if we're talking at scale here, what is your dream come true in many ways?
My dream come true would be that large groups of people take it upon themselves to support coalitions or advocacy efforts that push schools to ban technology use through high school. So basically no smartphones, no cell phones in high school, or through education to the end of high school. That would be a massive protective factor. The other would be to have really consistent age bans for social media and for smartphone technology. Some countries are already doing this and have already worked through the nuances and logistics. Australia
there you go. If you're listening, my hands are in the air right now and I got a big grin on my face. A person I know named Rob Evans, his daughter sadly died from complications with anorexia that stem from social media, online bullying, and the law is named after her, which is really special. So he went in to campaign to the Prime Minister, and before he was even seen, the Prime Minister walked out and held a press event and made it law that you can't have access to social media until you're 16 years old. Like, it can be done. It can be done.
That's amazing. And that's a testament to the power of, once people get together and take this stuff seriously, it has the ability to influence collective change.
Yeah.
The last one that would be my dream, not last, but another really important one would be that tech companies are held accountable for using license agreements or the changes in the user agreement to render larger and larger amounts of our privacy without our awareness. Mm-hmm. It's just that, every time your phone updates, you have those 20 pages of a user agreement to review to make sure you give them consent to do all the things that they're going to do that no one ever reads. Yeah. Would be to eliminate that as a not so clever way to steal and render behavioral data from everyone. So it would be for governments to actually pass legislation to hold tech companies accountable to that practice.
That, to me, sounds like the toughest. Going to be one of the toughest ones, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you and to finally have a conversation with you. I've known about you for years, and the last couple of times I reached out, it makes sense. You were probably on your social media hiatus because I didn't hear back.
Okay.
So very cool. We were able to close that loop and hopefully get to experience you in person one day soon. I'm inspired by you as a young man in this work. I'm inspired by you by the work you're doing and the research you're doing, and clearly the passion that you have for this as well. So endless amounts of gratitude to you, my friend.
Mm. Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation, Brandon, and the questions, and the chance to share something I'm really passionate about. It was a pleasure to meet you, man. And looking forward to sharing space with you in a more intimate way soon.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the greatest thanks and gratitude goes to you, the listeners who join us each and every week for this, the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is, in fact, more than one way to be a man. What do you say, Michael? We done that today?
I think we did.
I know we did. Lots of love. We'll see you next week. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your host, Boyson Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.
Hey, it's Boyson here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you. Hey, it's Boyson. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.